Hello fellow cyborgs and welcome to another mini wrap-up. I've been meaning to film one for a while, so I have 7 instead of 5 things to show you. Not that 5 is the official number, but 7 kind of, hopefully I won't talk more than I already am showing that I'm planning on talking today. So I'm going to talk to you about those 7 things that I have recently finished, and then the books that I am currently reading, and the physical state of my TBR. As part of the Bronte Binge 2019 project, I read The Professor by Charlotte Bronte with Acacia Ives. I will be shortly filming a video all about this in itself, its own little video. So I'll just briefly here say that I enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to, but this was a 3-star read. Next, I buddy read a booktube darling, I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This is a true crime book about the Golden State Killer. I buddy read this with a coworker. I also listened to it on audiobook. I did not enjoy this nearly as much as I was hoping. I think the hype got to me. I think also listening to this on audiobook is not the best decision. I think you might have a better experience reading it. And the main reason I don't recommend an audiobook is the organization of this book. The Golden State Killer's case is just enormous. The amount of information is mind-bogglingly vast. And I don't think the way this book was organized particularly helps kind of uncomplicate all of that. Perhaps that was the intention of the text, to have the reader feel the overwhelming amount of information just as the investigators would have had to do as the years progressed and the amount of evidence just got piled on top of each other. But especially in an audio experience, I felt almost like there was just this list of names, locations, dates, and evidence piles that just washed over me. And after reading an entire book on a serial killer, I do not think that I could talk about him or the cases or the victims with any more confidence or knowledge than before I read this book, which is kind of a problem in my book. However, I would say that the ending is very satisfying. I expected to be kind of left hanging since the Golden State Killer, his identity was confirmed after this book was published, but I found the ending to be very, very satisfying. So I don't not recommend this, but I would say don't pick audiobook if possible, and perhaps mediate your expectations a little bit, especially with all of the booktube hype in mind. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. Then I also finished the third Rivers of London book. This is called Whispers Underground. This is by Ben Aronovich. I have been listening to this series this year unexpectedly because my mom has been binging it. She has totally outpaced me at this point. She has caught up with the most current read and I have only 3 under my belt, but that's okay. If you remember, Moon Over Soho, which is the second book, really didn't thrill me all that much. I still gave it 3 out of 5 stars, but it just took a weird tonal shift that I wasn't here for. Whispers Underground felt a lot more like the first novel than the second, which is great, but I still wasn't totally enamored to just want to push on to the fourth. I really liked some of the new information we learned in the third book, but my overall complaint about this series is that as the books continue, I just have more questions and I'm not getting any answers to how the magic works, how the magical world works. And I think part of the problem too is that I don't believe that Peter knows as little as me. I think that we're just not 100% getting all of these like little moments, little quieter moments in the story where Peter's learning new magic and training with that, where Peter's slowly piecing together maybe how the magical community works. I feel like at this point, Peter, who is the POV character, knows more than he's telling me, and that's kind of bothering me a little bit. Overall though, I think the audiobooks narrated by Kobna Holbrook Smith are just absolutely delightful, and I definitely, when I want a kind of more chipper audiobook, will probably continue with the series one day or the next. Then I picked up Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. This is one of my most anticipated reads of 2019, even though I don't think I've talked about it like this. But at the end of 2018, I read Rolling in the Deep, which is the prequel novella to this. That was a delightful afternoon spent aboard the ship Atargatis and all of the bloody, awful things that happen there in the middle of the ocean. So needless to say, I did come into this with some pretty high expectations, and I think for the most part this did meet them. I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars, though I did enjoy this a little bit less than Rolling in the Deep. Part of the reason is because this book is significantly longer than the novella Rolling in the Deep. I felt that the tension, especially toward the horrific parts of this story, were pretty lacking. I'm not sure if that actually was a good thing for my anxiety. But when I was talking to Sarai, we both agreed that once the mermaids started attacking, there was a lot more like quiet, let's talk about this time than let's run from the mermaids who are eating our faces time. I think Sarai and I both, Sarai from Sarai Talks Books, we both agreed that if we had switched POV from the main central characters who were being spared the horror to some of the side characters who weren't, then that tension would have been upped, the horror factor would have been upped as well. I was worried that since I had read Rolling in the Deep, which talks about the biology of the mermaids quite a bit, that I would have no new discoveries to make about the mermaids in here, but I was wrong, and there were a lot of new, really fascinating scientific discoveries about the mermaids that kept me turning the page and really, really entertained. One thing I enjoyed, but I don't think worked really well in here, is that for the most part, this is written very cinematically. It's almost like I could see how this would be filmed into a movie. But occasionally, especially when you're meeting a new character, that cinematic sort of point of view where the information you are gleaning is pretty much only from what the characters are saying and what the characters can see rather than with inner language, intermixed with that, you will get 1 or 2 paragraphs of background information which humanizes these characters that you will care about. But I felt like this information was really better to have been left in the author's notes and not put down on the page. It felt really out of place, and it felt like I was getting information on these characters in this like omniscient sort of way, whereas before I had a more limited perspective. So apart from that little gripe, this was still really enjoyable. This is quality writing. I loved the inclusion of deaf characters, bisexual characters, and gay characters that's effortlessly woven in here. So many of these characters felt like real people, and even the ones where I kind of didn't like them, I still didn't necessarily want to see them eaten. This gets me really intrigued in trying more by Mira Grant because this was just a really good book. 4 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend. You may recognize this book since I've been holding it up before October of 2018. This is Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope, the second book in this Chronicles of Barsetshire, and I plan to read this for Victober, but only managed to start it in October. For some reason, this book was so sloggy for me to read, and I just couldn't get into it. I don't know why, because I know that Anthony Trollope is wonderful. I think his prose is absolutely hysterical and entertaining and pretty easy to read, especially for a Victorian novel. But for some reason, Barchester Towers just kept hanging over me. So I gave in and switched to the audiobook, and I am so pleased that I did. I found an audiobook narrated by David Shaw Parker, and it was just so good. It reminded me so much of David Timpson's narration of Dombey and Son and Our Mutual Friend. Both of those are by Charles Dickens, which just made those books and characters come to life for me in a way that reading the book myself really couldn't. So I did end up finishing Barchester Towers. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. There was surprisingly a lot more confusing church politics in here than I was expecting. I expected Warden to be the slog and this to be a little bit less. This definitely had a lot more fun, social, romantic sort of plot lines as well, but there were quite a lot where I was like, okay. So I didn't love this significantly more than The Warden, so they both are 3 stars right now in my book. I think if you're a little bit intimidated by the Chronicles of Barsetshire, but you really want to get on that train because the Victorian reading booktubers all recommend it, that you should go the audiobook route, especially if you can find those narrated by David Shaw Parker. He is amazing. And then I watched a lot of Libby Stevenson. She is a wonderfully unique booktuber who reads a heck of a lot of plays, a heck of a lot of William Shakespeare, and then also some more genres that are more well represented on BookTube. She has a Bard book club, however, where she goes in depth into different plays by William Shakespeare. Now, I have read my fair share of William Shakespeare. I even took a course on the tragedies in college for fun because I was that person many years ago. So watching her videos really pumped me up to read some Shakespeare, and I did have one volume on my shelves that you guys don't know about. This is Midsummer Night's Dream and Other Comedies by William Shakespeare. This is an old Borders hardcover, naked hardcover edition. I know, it's pretty gorgeous. Even though you're flesh will rub this off the covers, which is naked hardbacks. They just can't quite get it right. But anyway, I haven't tracked this on Goodreads because it really isn't on Goodreads, and I don't want to have to deal with that right now. In here is A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Taming of the Shrew, and As You Like It, I believe. Oh, I nailed it. It's like I know what my books have in them. This is a really beautiful edition that I kind of wish I hadn't told you about because I don't know that you can really get your hands on it anymore. But anyway, to wrap up this tirade, I read A Midsummer Night's Dream for the first time so that I could watch Libby Stevenson's video on it, and it was fine. It was okay. It wasn't my favorite. I think I definitely prefer the tragedies. I'm just a lot more of an emo kid than a happy kid. I found that the chaotic plotting of A Midsummer Night's Dream was actually kind of irritating for me. And right when I thought the play was done, we had to watch a play within a play that was, again, supposed to be funny, but I don't laugh a lot. So for me, it was just like, okay, I get it. It's a crap play. It's funny. So I enjoyed the nature writing, and I definitely enjoyed feeling smart by picking up Shakespeare and having a pretty good time reading it. But Midsummer Night's Dream is definitely not going to be one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, but I definitely loved that afternoon of reading Shakespeare and then listening to Libby gush about it. So if you haven't checked out Libby, you really, really should. I have her channel linked down below. You should go try some Shakespeare. I'm going to be reading some Shakespeare later this month because of her too, so give it a try. And then you guys remember this book, right? This is the collected autobiographies of Maya Angelou. This has the first 6. I think she wrote a total of 7, and we can't have collections that have all of the things, can we? So I've been working on this since 2018, since mid-2018, I think. Acacia and I recently read the 4th autobiography, The Heart of a Woman. I enjoyed this less than I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Sorry, this is slippery and heavy. I enjoyed this 4th autobiography less than I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, but much, much more than the 2nd and 3rd autobiographies, which I didn't get on with very much at all. This takes place in the 1950s and 60s and talks a lot about the civil rights movement in America, and then also takes place in some parts of Africa and kind of talks about the dichotomy between Africans and African Americans a little bit as well. My overall experience with most of these autobiographies, the ones after I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, is a lot of flurried movement and change in life situations. Acacia and I have nicknamed it the 3-chapter life decision, especially in volumes 2 and 3. Maya Angelou just made these really drastic life decisions that would last about 3 chapters, and then another drastic life decision would come on top of it. There weren't as many of those drastic life changes in the 4th volume, but the other thing that we've been noticing is there's a lot of name dropping coming from someone who does not love Maya Angelou from the outset. I have only read her autobiographies. I have not read her poetry. I have not read a biography about her. I have very little knowledge of Maya Angelou and her life. I think if I loved Maya Angelou and her life, I would be absolutely fascinated that she met all of these famous people because she just happened to be in the same circle as them as they were making names for themselves. But for me, who am not expecting that, it kind of feels like bragging sometimes. But apart from that lack of understanding on my part, The Heart of a Woman definitely is my 2nd favorite autobiography of hers so far, and this makes me really hopeful that the last 2 autobiographies I have to read will hopefully be more enjoyable experiences than I found in the 2nd and 3rd. So as you can tell, I've been reading a lot of things that weren't already on my physical TBR, so because of that, my physical TBR right now is at 34. I've edged it down just a little bit, but not a whole heck of a lot, and that's okay. I've been enjoying my reading. It's been fun being spontaneous with my choices and not feeling overly guilty. But let's talk about the books that I'm currently reading as well, and hopefully will maybe get down my TBR. Continuing the Bronte book binge, I am buddy reading The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte with Acacia Ives. This is a reread, so this won't get my TBR down, but that's okay. I've been very, very slowly making my way through this. For some reason, physically reading books has been really sloggy for me, whereas audiobooks have been fast as lightning in the first couple months of this year, so that's been really strange. But I've been enjoying this a lot more than the first time I read it. I think my expectations are a little bit more realistic this time. I'm also more emotionally invested with the characters and feel like they are people rather than these stiff cardboard characters. That was the experience I had the first time I read it. But because I'm emotionally invested, the middle section is just bothering me so much. So I have to just get on with that and just enjoy what there is here to enjoy. So I will update you more on that next time I do a wrap up. Hopefully this will be in it. It had better because I need to read it by the end of February. Something definitely not on my physical TBR, as you can tell by this library edition, is Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff. This is I picked up because of Black History Month in February in America. That's where I live. And this I'm enjoying so much so far. This is kind of, it says it's a novel, but it's more like interconnected short stories from what I can tell so far, but I'm really, really enjoying this. This is a lot of fun, really well written, and I love how the horror elements in here are just as much racist white people as it is elder gods. So gonna learn some stuff and be depressed, but then have a good time learning that stuff. I also got the audiobook of Dr. Thorne, the next book in the Chronicles of Barsetshire, narrated by David Shaw Parker. I'm enjoying getting through this. Definitely less church politics, which is nice, and hopefully I can get this one off my TBR and talk to you about it next time I see you. And then just really quick, wanted to mention that Shakespeare play I'm planning on reading, which is Richard II. This is what the Bard Book Club is reading for the month of February, and I'm really looking forward to Libby's video on it once I actually get to it. So those are all the books I want to flash you with today. Please let me know in the comments down below, are you up for reading Shakespeare, or does he seem like a incomprehensible white whale to your bookshelf? Also, if you have any brilliant audiobook recommendations for me, I would love to keep adding more to my Libro FM wish list. So leave those down below in the comments. Thank you for watching, and until next time, continue to be lovely.